You're the chief marketing officer at WeWork. Are we going to talk about that today?
How much wine do you have?
Today, we're going to look at doing marketing with a zero budget, something that's very relevant for a lot of startups. How do we get this thing off the ground with no money at all? Today, we're talking to Robin Daniels. He has massive experience in marketing. He's worked for companies like LinkedIn, Salesforce, Box, even WeWork. He's also worked with a lot of startups and knows what it takes to build some marketing with no budget. He's going to give us 5 tips to do marketing with zero budget. This is Raw Startup. Today we're talking about doing marketing with a zero budget, something that is very, very relevant to a lot of startups. Maybe they're building a product, but there is no budget to get the ball rolling. With us today, we have Robin, who is very experienced in this, both from, bigger corporations, but also smaller startups. Robin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Heine. Good to be here. Good to see you. So I am originally from Copenhagen, Denmark, born and raised here, but I lived the last 20 years in California in Silicon Valley, where I worked for companies such as Salesforce, Box, LinkedIn, WeWork, you might have heard about, but I also worked for small startups that had zero budget and had to figure out their way in the world and get a brand name for themselves. So I have experience with small companies, large companies, and today I'm excited to share some of those learnings with you. But now I'm the chief marketing officer at a really cool growth stage startup called Matterport, which is all about indexing the built world around us using both sophisticated AI and spatial mapping technology and also camera technology.
We're going to get going here. We're going to give 5 tips to doing marketing with a zero budget. Number 1, use LinkedIn, not Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, this one is so critical nowadays. Especially if you have a company that has no budget and you really want to think about, well, how do I engage with a community of people who might be interested in my products? LinkedIn has really emerged as this pure play community of people who are both there to learn, to connect, but also certainly to learn about what's happening in the world of tech and products and services and so on. So it's a great way to start building a brand around both yourself personally, but also around your company. And you see the explosion of what's happened with LinkedIn engagement in the last couple of years, and especially since the pandemic really hit. The engagement is super high there. And so it's a great place to go versus, I think, Twitter or Facebook, which on Twitter, there's just so much garbage out there and everything just seems to get lost in the feed instantly. Facebook has become super divisive and political. And it's this weird chasm between either divisiveness or very personal, what you don't really want to be sold to when you're in your personal mindset. I think the other one that probably is still pretty good for really building an audience is certainly Instagram, right? But that's probably more for consumer grade products would be my guess. When you think about how you build a brand, it really is 3 steps. You have to make people aware of who you are. You have to then educate people about what you do. And then you have to make people fall in love with what it is that you offer to the world. And I think LinkedIn is that positive community. And I think one of the big reasons, especially on LinkedIn, is because people's real identities are attached to what they say. So that means people are not going in there and trying to just throw shade because it's their real people. It will reflect back on the companies they work for. It'll reflect back on themselves as people.
So you are saying that LinkedIn will give you more engagement from the right people.
That's right. The thing about it, I don't know the latest numbers. I think it's over 700 million users now. And, you go on there and the engagement is crazy high. People are posting stuff constantly. But one of the things, that I tell people a lot, especially at my company is, if you're trying to really gain some momentum and think about boosting the brand awareness of Matterport, actually the best thing you can do is not just post about Matterport all the time. Usually those kind of posts will get deprioritized. The algorithm will put them lower in the feed. Post things that are authentic, that either you have a POV on, a point of view, or maybe a learning, or an insight, or giving something back that people can benefit from. If you just come across as this spammy person who's always talking about your company, I can guarantee you're going to get zero engagement and people are going to not pay attention.
So finally, I just want to, and this is not really a question, just want to touch upon LinkedIn versus Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter in this case. It also feels like Facebook especially is very paid. Any comment on that?
Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is. I don't think anything company related really shows up unless you're paying for it, which is why it's so hard, I think, to really get anything kind of organic traffic going on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a little bit of my point here is that Twitter doesn't have much traction of any kind, honestly, in the big way. Then you have Facebook and Instagram. They're very, very paid. You really have to pay to do something there, which means you need a budget. And that's where LinkedIn is different, right?
Yes,
You can
exactly.
do things for free and really get organic growth. Number two, create lots of content and double down on what works.
Yeah, if you are a startup with no budget, you have to be a content machine. And how do you become a content machine that actually gets engagement? Well, there's a couple of different rules you should use. So number one is you have to speak like a human. When I was at Salesforce, we had this rule called the Aloha rule. I don't know if they have it anymore because I haven't been at Salesforce for a while. But basically, the rule was whenever we speak or write, you speak and write like a human being. Don't be a robot. Don't use gobbledygook. Don't use jargon. Just speak like a freaking human being, right? So everybody can relate to it.
It's harder than you think.
It is harder than you think. Of course it is, right? But the test is always like if somebody were to ask you something, a question about what do you do, what's your brand, what do you stand for, how would you say it to another person? So we say one thing, and then when we start writing it down, it becomes super formal, and it's like it's a huge disconnect. So number one is speak and write like a human. Number two is use stories from real people. Like go out and mine as many real stories. It's much more powerful to hear from your customers or your fans or yours than it is just about you talking about how great you are. Now you might come out and say, well, I don't really have any customers yet, which is a totally fair point. Well, there's always ways to get people to believe in your product, your service, your journey without them becoming full-blown customers. Number three, have fun. I think so many brands, even though they're solving really serious problems in the world and they have serious products, take themselves way too seriously. You can solve serious things and be a serious company without taking yourself super seriously. So have fun in the way you write, in the way you communicate. The best marketing is when you both entertain people, but also put a smile on their face. That becomes super memorable. That becomes stuff that becomes shareable and people want to actually send to their friends and family and colleagues and everything else. So make it fun. Don't be too dry. And then number four, the fourth rule I would say after having fun is you got to tie it into something that people care about. And there's many ways of skinning that, of course. If you don't tie it into something, you'll be tone deaf. But how do you tie it into something that people care about? Your posts, your content, and so on. Well, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can tie into what people care about personally. That's one level. You can tie into what people care about from a family perspective. Like, is your product going to make my family happier, more unified? All those things. You can tie it into the work level. Like, is your product going to make me better at work, more productive? Is it going to make my work more efficient, make me more money, and so on? You can try to tie it into bigger themes that's happening in the social world. And at the highest level, can you tie it into some of these global issues that are facing humanity? The pandemic right now is on everybody's mind, climate change, and so on. But my point is, you got to tie your story into one of those things that people care about, or else it's like, I don't have time, because people are so overloaded with information right now.
Yeah, you could probably even say that fundamentally, people are not going to care about your product. So if you can tie it into something they do care about, you might get traction.
It's about like, how do I find my dream job? Something like that people are like, it's on people's mind. Oftentimes you'll just see those kind of posts skyrocket. So I posted about the difference between working in a small company, a mid-sized company, a big company, and kind of like how you forge your own path, how you find a dream job. A lot of people right now are like stuck in their jobs. They want to find something that's meaningful. And that was very relevant because it's something that's everyone thinking about. I'm like, I start with just putting out a lot of content, but I first actually have an editorial process. I write down a lot of thoughts first to see which ones I think would be interesting or would actually give something back. And then sometimes I go and test out some of these thoughts on a Twitter or on Instagram or Facebook to just kind of see what kind of quick reactions you get. And if there's some good feedback, positive momentum, then I can go and hone that message a little bit and then put it out on LinkedIn where I know, both my community are, but potentially also my buyers are going to be.
Number three, get customers to tell your story.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that the best storytelling by far is when your customers and your fans tell the story about why they like your product or your service or your company more than anything. It's so much more powerful than you just talking about yourself. Sure. And if you want to become a super brand, at some point you have to create a community around your company. When I think about the companies out there that do it well, is because they're constantly investing in the community, constantly telling the story that we care about your success. We care about your stories. We want to elevate you. And so, for example, one of my good friends who I used to work for a little bit at Salesforce, his name is Tim Barker. He's had a great career. He's a great leader. He's now CEO of a company in the UK that's focused on mental health. And he's been thinking heavily about, well, how do I get my company back to work? And so he's been using Matterport to go in and scan the space and to show his employees how they're going to set up the office when people come back to work. It was a great use of our technology, and he tweeted about it. And of course, I tweeted it back, I retweeted it, but I also then took that screenshot of his tweet, which was so powerful, and I put it on LinkedIn. And it just becomes a way of just using your customer story. Like, look at this person who has a lot of authority, who people listen to, saying something great about our company. It was not me saying it, it's somebody else. And I think that's just the best you can do is harness those voices. And there's many out there.
If somebody else tells a story about how amazing you are, it's just more credible, right?
It's always more credible. If you want to cross into the mainstream, it's great being a pioneer brand, an early adopter brand, all those things. But at some point, if you want to cross into the mainstream, you really got to get customers to say publicly that they love you. That's how you know that you become mainstream brand.
I mean, for Vivino, this is our entire growth story, right? People sitting at a dinner table drinking wine and scanning wine bottles. That's how we built most of our growth. But if you build a great story that people can repeat, now they're telling your story anyway. You put it in their mouth and they'll tell the story.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's so impressive to see the massive community you've built of what, hundreds of millions of users now or something?
We got 50 million users, yeah.
How many users?
50 million.
That's amazing. It's amazing, a community of users, really.
And like 20,000 people install the app every day, and 80% of that is word of mouth. That's other users giving other users a reason to install the app, right? Exactly. They're telling that story and they're listening and installing, right?
It's amazing. It's an amazing story, really.
Number 4, insert yourself into hot topics conversations.
This is such an interesting one where you have to really tread a little lightly, but it can be massively powerful for yourself and your company if you do so. Again, figuring out like what's trending and tying into those stories is super important. So whether or not that's talk about a company, something happening in the world, but like inserting yourself into those hot topics of conversation just means that you're coming across with a point of view on something that people care about right now.
I'd say fundamentally, people care more about these hot topics than your company. So if you can link yourself to that hot topic, well, you're in it. Did you post something about pop culture or zeitgeist or something?
Yeah, so I did. So recently, this was last week, I posted about feeling like I have 2 jobs. I have my Zoom job and I have my job that's outside of Zoom. So basically I have 2 jobs where I get shit done. So I feel like, okay, I have 2 jobs. And that post just took off because everyone's like, again, looking at it like, I can relate. Everyone has Zoom fatigue. Zoom is a great tool, but everyone has Zoom fatigue. So it's like, it was both, I think, relevant. It's a little bit funny because people can relate to it. And it was also like, okay, I'm not alone.
So I think you had an example or two of something you did post on LinkedIn that went really well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I posted something about being at WeWork. I thought 2019 was a crazy year being at WeWork and going through that crazy hypergrowth and then that very public come down, so to say. And then 2020 came along and I was like, hold my beer. And it was just like such a small insight and comment. One of my most responded to posts ever. And the thing is, I didn't even talk about the company I was at. And the reason why is I didn't have to, because it automatically is reflected in me being the poster of this. Every time somebody sees my post, it says next to my name, I'm the CMO at Matterport. So I've also done, I've done other posts as well that also, again, take this notion of tying into the pandemic, tying into what's happening in popular culture. So I did one on Airbnb, for example. And this was really exciting. This was actually the most well-responded to post that I've ever done. I got over 400,000 views of this post, which is like an order of magnitude more than anything else I've done. And my commentary was basically about, Airbnb's remarkable recovery after a few months of this pandemic. And then suddenly Airbnb comes out in June, the CEO, Brian, and says, you know what, our bookings are back to near normal levels. And it was such an astounding comment when everybody thought this industry was not going to survive. And my commentary was in this, that this is only happening because they have created a super brand. They have invested in the long term of a brand. They have not just focused on the short term transaction. They stood for something. People believe in their mission. They want to be part of their ecosystem.
Number 5, invest in as many friendships as you can.
Yeah, this is honestly a great work skill, but more importantly, it's a great life skill. And you know what? It just takes time to do so. And the amount of people I've met virtually, but never in person, just keeps exponentially going up. So for example, I met this guy called Brian Sharp on LinkedIn also. And then one day we said, so let's chat online because, there's a lot of stuff that I like that you're doing on Matterport. I'd love to just give you some feedback. So we connected online. And then he told me the story about how he's about to actually sell the house that he has had for the last, I think, decade plus with him and his kids. And his kids grew up there. And it was a very personal house because they built it basically from scratch. They customized everything, but it was time to move on. They had to move to a different part of England. And he told me the story and I said, this is such an incredible story. If you're going to document it using Matterport, can I help you tell that story to the world? Because it's not a story of a financial gain or, how he's helping his company be more efficient. It's a very personal, emotional story. I said, this is amazing because you want to scan your house. Let me get this straight. You want to scan your house so that when your kids are a little bit older, you can pull up this 3D virtual tour and show them, hey, remember, this is where you grew up. This is where we used to play together. Like, imagine, Heine, if you could go back to your childhood home in the Faroe Islands, if I could go back to my little apartment in the center of Copenhagen, where it would be an amazing experience. And other people have then become inspired by, wow, I didn't know I could do that because I thought your technology was just for hardcore business use. Maybe actually I can use it for more personal things.
No, I think it's a great story. It's a story people can relate to. And maybe your technology you can't really relate to, but this story you can, right?
Yeah. I became friends with a guy called Clint Lawson, who is a guy who just reached out to me on LinkedIn. He said, hey, I'm a big fan of Matterport. Let me know if I can share some of my scans with you that I'm doing in these historical buildings in New Zealand. And he started sharing with me. And I've been so enamored with what he's sharing that I keep posting his stuff. And it's a great way, again, of like, look at what is coming out of our community. It's not like Matterport saying, look at this scan. It's like from our community who's like bubbling this up because they're so excited about being part of this.
So here's the list of the 5 tips on doing marketing with a zero budget. If you want more content like this, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you very much for watching.